but it's not. I think it's ready. I just haven't put it up yet. I feel like I need to read it another 10 times before I do that. Even though we've been sitting on this translation for literally at least a year now. So, but still feel like a little bit anxious about putting this one out there, but it is what it is. All right, Bismillah. Okay, so first things first, this is a translation of a small piece of a poem by Imam al-Dardir, Imam al-Barakat, Ahmed al-Dardir. And basically, to take you all back, some of the Zoom people will remember, I think this was the first text that we ever studied in the Majlis, if I'm not mistaken. When we very first started, like 2000, end of 2016, early 2017, we were meeting in Uncle Shahid's house. And we used to make a little bit of dhikr and then we'd have a lesson. And the lesson was from this book. And the book is called Al-Kharidatul Bahiyya, the illustrious pearl of Imam al-Dardir. The Kharida is a very famous intro-level Aqidah text. Intro to advanced, depending on which commentary you're reading. But the text itself is intro, and then his commentary would take it to the medium level. And then if you read like the Hashia of Imam Sawi or Shaykh al-Bakhit al-Mutiyi or others, then you would kind of take it to like advanced level. So this is like it's a very foundational text in Aqidah. The end of the Aqidah text, he talks about tasawwuf. We're just going to use the word since we're already falling into the ocean of slander anyways. So the end of the text talks about tasawwuf, and he says what he means by it and so on and so forth. And the reason why he does that is because the amali side of Aqidah is tasawwuf. So the practical side of Aqidah is spirituality, Islamic spirituality. So like it's one side of the coin is what we believe about God, and the other side of the coin is our experience with God. And so he talks about, he puts it in the end of the text. He talks about things that you already know about, like fear and hope and patience and gratitude and everything that you talk about in these things, right? Tawbah, I think there's like 10 things that he points out. So there's gratitude, there's fear, there's hope, there's Tawbah, there's following true teachers, and a number of other things. You can look it up. I think there's a translation out there. In any case, this part that's in this translation that we're going to publish, inshallah, and that I had initially put the title of False Shaykhs and True Shaykhs on, but one Shaykh, he reached out to me and he told me there's a problem with this, and that is that you made it a dichotomy. So someone could be not a true Shaykh, but not a false Shaykh too. Like maybe they haven't reached the level of being a true Shaykh, but they're still like a good, decent person, and they may not have reached, they're not false. So be careful of the dichotomy. So I changed the title to Imam Abu al-Barakat al-Dardir on the qualities of a true Shaykh. So that way it's a little bit more gradiented. So this is his commentary on half of a line of the poem. The line in the poem is where he said, Rahimahullah, وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ النَّاسِكِينَ الْعُلَمَاء, and follow the way of the righteous scholars, basically. It's not a long piece. It might take us a couple of sessions, we'll see. In addition to I did the translation, and we wanted to make it a group Majlis teachers effort. So I did the translation, and Ustad Fuad did the biography of Imam al-Dardir, and my wife wrote a concluding reflections, call it the concluding reflections. Also notable about Imam al-Dardir is he is the topic of Shaykh Walid's PhD. So Shaykh Walid, who was with us last week at the retreat, his PhD was on his PhD thesis was on Imam al-Dardir. And this was the first text that we taught. Okay, so this was it's like it's a very beloved text to us. And also Imam al-Dardir himself represents to us kind of like, how should I say, kind of like in some ways like the pinnacle of the tradition. Not that he was the best of the people who came, but that he represented like all of the facets of what came to be known as like a true scholar. someone who mastered all of the various disciplines, someone who was well respected amongst the people, someone who was there with the poor and stuff like that, helped the oppressed, someone who was a great spiritual master, someone who was very brave in standing for the truth, and so on. So, and like that really is like the essence of what we say when we say that the scholars are the heirs of the prophets. We're not talking about like any random person who graduated a program. We're talking about someone who really has all of these qualities. Someone else that comes to mind when we talk about Imam al-Dardir, always the Shaykh al-Rayyan, Allah yarhamu, and then always Shaykh Imam Rafat, Allah yarhamu. So these people, to me, and I shouldn't talk on everyone else's behalf, but to me, these are like, when we talk about the inheritance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is what we're talking about. So I'll read the translation. I'll read everything here word by word. It starts with a little intro and then there's the biography. So we'll start with that. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qala al-Mutarjim. Although that's a problem because is the Mutarjim now the translator or the one who wrote the bio? The translator. غفر الله له وعفى الله عنه وتجاوز عن سيئاته وستر له عيوبه حفظه الله. In the end of the famous poem of Imam Sayyid al-Barakat al-Dardir, the illustrious pearl, the author addresses the foundations of spiritual rectification according to the teachings of Islam. The author himself was a well-known and respected scholar, worshipper of the highest caliber, and a man of tasawwuf. In the footnote, I said, as a community, we need not fear the word tasawwuf. In fact, this term and idea existed in the dictionary of Islamic terminology from very early on, and was embraced within the guidelines of Aqidah and Sharia, which will come by Muslim scholarship. Yani the conversation on Aqidah and Sharia will come. Deviations and excesses from those who claim a connection to tasawwuf do not take away from the truth of the concept and its centrality to how we understand our faith. Okay, so that's the footnote. If you have any questions about anything at any point, please feel free to ask. Okay? Among the things that he addresses in this section is a commentary on the qualities of a true Shaykh. In the footnote, it says the Shaykh refers here to someone who is able to provide spiritual guidance and rectification for his or her followers, not what we commonly call anyone who has a college-level Islamic education. So this is the first issue that we have to address. Okay, when we use the word Shaykh, we can mean any number of different things by that. And there are different kinds of shaykhs. There is what they call Shaykh al-Ta'aleem, and there is Shaykh al-Tarbiyah. And then there are some who are Shaykh al-Ta'aleem and Tarbiyah. So there's a shaykh who is a shaykh of education only, meaning they've mastered a certain sort of educational curriculum, and they're able to convey those teachings. Okay, and that's the Shaykh of Ta'aleem. It's the Shaykh of education. The Shaykh of Tarbiyah is different. Shaykh of Tarbiyah is the one who has also mastered those things, but they have a specialized knowledge that helps the person in their journey to Allah. They're able to take the person and help them in their journey to Allah. That's their role. And this is actually one of the roles of the Prophet ﷺ, as mentioned in the Quran. Right? I remember, like, I used to, before this concept clicked in my head, I used to read the verse and I used to feel like there's something missing from our commentary on this verse. Okay? Because the verse says, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. Okay, I'll translate it right now. Welcome. Feel free, feel comfortable, sit wherever you like, get something to eat, something to drink, no worries. So the verse, it says that God is the one who sent to the people a messenger from among themselves, and this messenger reads to them or recites to them his verses, God's verses, the Quran, and yuzakkihim, and purifies them, and teaches them the book and wisdom, the Sunnah, even though before that they were in error. Okay. So what is one of the roles specifically mentioned of the Prophet ﷺ here is that he purifies the people. It's a very interesting description, right? Like we always talk about it like, yeah, tazkiyah is part of the religion, spiritual purification, rectification is part of the religion, so on and so forth. But it's not just saying that, like it's saying that the Prophet actually did this to them. He actually helped the people to become closer to Allah, to take care of their diseases and their sicknesses and stuff. He helped them to deal with that. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is one of the descriptions. So why am I saying all of this? Because when we're talking about here, like, we have to distinguish between these two. There is someone who can teach you some material, and there's someone that can guide you in life. They're not always the same person. Sometimes they're the same person, sometimes they're not the same person. Sometimes the person who is very well educated will end up in the position of giving that life guidance to everyone. So this is how you should act with your family, this is how you should do this is how you get over your issue with patience, this is how you have more gratitude, so on and so forth. But they're not always actually qualified to do that. Okay? At the level of like this capital Sheen Shaykh that we're talking about here. All right, so this is a very, this is for the American Muslim community, this is very murky water that we're in right now. So like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We might have to like put some of them to the end, but I'm trying to take it step by step so that you can follow, everyone can be on the same page, inshallah. And I've touched on this before, like the idea, it gets really muddled. So like anyone who's the imam, because we love people, we respect them, we appreciate them, whatever. So I'll take anything to them. They're like, I have this problem, like I can't figure out how to do such and such, and then maybe they're not able to do that. Like we're giving them a position that maybe they don't have. And there's gradients, like I said in the beginning, there's a gradient. Just because they don't have like the level of the true Shaykh doesn't mean they don't have anything. And then there's also the ones that are just, we'll get to that too. There's much conversation in the American Muslim community around the idea of fake sheikhs and cases of spiritual abuse. As such, we felt that this small section may be valuable for those who understand the need for spiritual mentorship, but also recognize the very real potential dangers in such a relationship. Okay, so this point, I've made it before as well. Anytime, this is not specific to a religious teacher, okay? Anytime that we're close to someone, we're now in a position where they can hurt us at some level. Okay? It's a little bit scary if you think about it, but if we're close to someone, we're necessarily in a position where they can hurt us. The question is, have I put that trust in the right place? Okay. So hopefully in our relationships, like with our children, with our parents, with our spouses, ideally, those are relationships that lend to the possibility of great hurt, but don't end up doing that. They end up being relationships that, because of that potentiality, they also are relationships of great benefit. Because there's a level of vulnerability that's necessary there. Okay, it's like I always mention the line from Common, the famous American poet Common from Chicago, who said, "I want to be the one that makes you the happiest and hurts you the most." And it's a song about love. Is he actually saying that he wants to be the one that hurts the girl the most or the woman the most? No. But he's saying that necessarily what comes along with making you the one that makes you the happiest is necessarily comes along with that the possibility that I'm also the one who can hurt you the most. Okay? So this is a general idea. Now you take this and say, what is the most important thing? Theoretically, what is the most important thing in our life? Is our relationship with God. This the very potential danger of this is that I'm going to someone and I'm believing that this person is going to help me in my relationship with God. It's a very vulnerable position, right? So I have to be smart about the way that I do that. I have to think about it. I don't just like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to throw everything in. You don't have to leave all cautiousness and so on and so forth. And it'll come up as we continue. The entirety of the relevant section is the author's commentary on half a line of his poem, wherein he said, Rahimahullah ta'ala wa nafa'allahu iyahu bi'ulumihi fid darain, ameen, wattabi' sabil an-nasikin al-ulama, and follow the way of the nasikin, the ulama, which we'll get to when we get to it. What makes this section so relevant and interesting is that the author was someone who was speaking from within the tradition of tasawwuf and understood the importance of a real shaykh. In fact, he was basically unanimously agreed upon by the great people of knowledge and piety of his time to have been one. At the same time, his comments on the topic are coming within a work that he wrote on Islamic theology, which will later become a standard primer for studying the topic in schools such as Al-Azhar. So we cannot say that he did not understand Aqidah. This is a common thing that comes up when we talk about Tasawwuf, right? Someone will say, oh, these people who talk about Tasawwuf, they just say these things because they don't know anything about, their Aqidah is wrong. They don't know anything about Allah, right? He literally wrote the textbook on Aqidah. Right? Like this is coming in the textbook on Aqidah. It's in the end of the same textbook, right? Which is a common refrain against those scholars who engage in this field of exploration. He was also a great scholar and commentator in the Maliki madhab, authoring works there that would become standard textbooks for the study of the school. His comments give us insight into the development of Islamic thought, its main areas of study, and how to approach the important question that is at the center of this selection. Preceding the translation is a biography of the Imam authored by Ustad Fuad al-Gawhari, Hafidhahullah. After the selection, there is a reflective essay written on the topic by Shaykh Muslim al-Karmal, Hafidhahullah. May Allah grant us tawfiq and give us good in all affairs. Ameen. Biography. Now, as a side note, biographies are really important. I think that like a lot of, for example, like, I don't know if this is a good example, but bear with me for a second. There's a reason, like there's a lot of critique sometimes around hadith. Can we trust hadith? Can we not trust hadith? Is it reliable? Is it not reliable? A lot of shade thrown on hadith, so on and so forth. And there are valid reasons in some cases to say that and to ask those questions and to say like, okay, so what is going on here? Is this really all trustworthy and so on and so forth? Those are reasonable questions. But we would ask the question with a different tone if we knew the biographies of the people who did this work. Like if we just knew who al-Bukhari was and who Muslim was and Nasa'i and Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah, and we read their lives and we understand what they did and what went into their work, it's not that we don't ask the same question. We might ask the same question. We're just going to ask it a little bit different. Like, okay, I recognize that this person literally spent his entire life from his childhood to his old age, traveling everywhere and memorizing everything he get his hands on and asking questions and debating and critiquing. And he was really much closer to the time of the Prophet and so on and so forth. Like, at least we understand what we're dealing with, okay? And there's a lot of important questions that should be asked. One is going to study, one is going to learn, one is going to try to engage with this religion and the time and place that we live in. There are important questions to be asked. But when we know a little bit about the biographies of people, then at least we can do it with a little bit of adab. You see this in community too, right? Like if you think about sometimes you might disagree with someone. You don't know anything about them, you don't know them, you just met them. You're going to disagree with them probably a little bit more harshly than you would if you're talking to someone who you really know and you respect. You're just going to like pose it differently because there's a little bit something there. You're going to be like, wait a second, like I disagree with this person right now, but I know them. Like I know where they're coming from. I know where they studied. I know what they did. I know why they, like I know a little bit about them to be like, let me understand first where they're coming from before I just like, get into an argument, take it to that level, so on and so forth. So the biography is important. Imam al-Barakat Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Abu Hamid al-Adawi al-Dardir came from a pious family and a community known for producing Islamic scholars. He was born in the upper Egyptian village of Beni Adi on the outskirts of present-day Asyut in 1127 after Hijrah, 1715 of the Common Era. So he's not that long ago, right? Secondly, he was born about 300 years ago. It's not that long ago. And it's a long time ago in the framework of American history. It's not a long time ago in the framework of Islamic history, right? Like 300 years is actually pretty recent. By American history, I mean the history of the United States of America, not the lands that are wherein the United States of America occupied. I think that's an accurate term. 1715 CE. The village of Beni Adi received its illustrious name after the Benu Adi tribe of the Quraysh who settled there. Thus, al-Dardir's noble lineage returns to the second caliph of Islam, Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar ibn Khattab. His father, Muhammad ibn Ahmed al-Dardir, who died in 1726, was a pious man who had a strong attachment to the Quran. He taught Quranic memorization and recitation locally and was held in high regard by the townspeople who considered him a saintly figure. Al-Dardir recounts numerous saintly miracles seen not only by his immediate family, but often by the locals regarding his father. So here's another example of like the agitation of our community when it comes to like ideas and concepts and things. Like when you say the word saint, oftentimes in the Muslim community, people start to get anxious. Why? Like we don't need to understand and posit our entire existence as in contrast to someone else. That's what it comes down to. Like a lot of how we've understood Islam in America is it's not like we're not the West, which is just complete nonsense in the first place. Like there's no reason to do that in the first place. You know, you're like, oh no, they're not acting very Muslim, they're acting really Western. What exactly does that mean? Like if you're a Muslim who's been born and raised in the West, you should be acting Western. Like that's where you're from. That's not a sign of religiosity. You know, some people are like, well, I don't do that because that's what like, you know, I don't know. Like, how can you wear a tie? Doesn't a tie look like a cross or something? What are you saying? It's a tie. People wear ties. You know, you have a wedding ring on your finger. Isn't that what the non-Muslims do? Okay, like, what does that have to do with anything? You know, you can wear a wedding ring on your finger. The same thing we do when it comes to like this whole, we've posited a lot of how we understand Islam in America as we're not the Catholics. We don't have the hierarchy that the Catholics have. We don't have the saints. We don't have all of these things. It's like it's a Protestant Islam, which is, it's actually like, if you look at it, there's modern movements in Islam that are very Protestant in their nature. They're like get rid of all of the tradition, get rid of all the saints, get rid of all of these things. But like, if we say saint, we just mean a wali. And the idea of a wali or the awliya is part of our aqidah actually. It's in Imam al-Tahawi's, someone was asking me earlier about the aqidah tahawiyya. The aqidah of Imam al-Tahawi, he mentions it in there, that we believe in the miracles of the saints. This is actually, like, everyone agreed on this. It's not a matter of dispute. That there's people who are close to God, and by way of their closeness to God, God made miraculous things happen on their hands. That's not an issue. I mean, we do believe in miracles. They're in the Quran too, right? They may be hard for us. We went over this recently when we talked about Isra and Mi'raj in the Burda, right? Like, it may be hard for us as modern people to work through this a little bit, but we believe in it. Okay. So anyways, he's a saintly figure. His mother related a famous account to al-Dardir that she often saw a light emanating from his father's room, as if a candle was lit, in the darkest hours of the night. When his father was asked about this light, his reply was that it was from the light of offering salutations and benedictions upon the Prophet ﷺ. So there's a light coming from his room, but there's no light in his room. So she's asking him, what is this light coming from? And he's saying, this light is from saying, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Saying a lot of salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. Al-Dardir also relates that his father refused to accept any compensation for teaching the Book of God and would often provide food and shelter for his students who did not have much. Allah give us the ability to do this. And Imam al-Dardir was greatly influenced by his community and the number of highly esteemed scholars hailing from his village. Interestingly enough, about him not taking money for teaching. The early Hanafi school, it's not permissible to take money for active worship, like leading prayers, leading Jum'ahs, making adhan, teaching even. You're not allowed to take any compensation for it financially. The later scholars of the Hanafi school, they allowed it for the preservation of the religion out of necessity, not because on principle it's allowed. So, you know, may Allah give us wealth from where we don't know so that we don't have to take money for these things. You know what I mean? Imam al-Dardir was greatly influenced by his community and the number of highly esteemed scholars hailing from his village. One such scholar, known both for his erudite knowledge and his principled stance in confronting the Mamluk emirs, was Shaykh Ali as-Sa'idi. Presiding over the dormitory of Al-Azhar for the students of Upper Egypt, as-Sa'idi had many disciples who followed his lead of both highly advanced scholarship and an unwavering commitment to intercede on behalf of the townspeople in addressing their grievances with the ruling elite. This high regard for both principled social engagement and scholarly pursuit became a hallmark of the scholars of Upper Egypt. So it wasn't, what's amazing about this model is that these are extremely scholarly people who are not ivory tower scholarly people. which sometimes you do find, right? You shouldn't make assumptions, but sometimes you do find that. There were people who like, and kind of like by the way Al-Azhar is, if you stay in that area, it's difficult to be kind of ivory tower. You could go there and just teach and leave, and you could still be ivory tower. But if you're gonna like actually be in Al-Azhar and Darb al-Ahmar and Hussein and like all these areas, inevitably you have to deal with the people at some level because it's like a very Shabi area, which I feel like there's no good translation for the word Shabi. Is there any good translation for the word Shabi, the Muslimin, or any Arabic speakers? I feel like anytime I try to find a word, it's not the right word. It doesn't do exactly what you need it to do. But it's like you're with the people. You're with the people. It has like a social element to it. Anyways. Huh? Your kushri, yeah. You have to go and eat kushri at Kushri Nigmat Hussein, which is right across from Jami al-Azhar. And you have to go down the street and you have to go to Masjid al-Hussein. You have to get your asir from behind Masjid al-Hussein. Like these are things that are like daruri. They're necessary to the experience of the person. Anyways, they were known for this. Raised by and having kept company with such immensely pious, principled, and scholarly class, it is no surprise that al-Dardir was influenced to study sacred knowledge at a young age. He received his initial education in Quranic memorization and recitation from his father, and his love for studying the sacred disciplines continued to grow. After completing his primary education in Beni Adi, al-Dardir traveled to Cairo to further pursue his studies at Al-Azhar University. There he attended many of the highly acclaimed study circles of renowned Islamic scholars of his time, and would eventually earn the distinction of participating in the circles of Hadith scholars, Shaykh Ahmed al-Sabbagh, the Shaykh al-Azhar Shamsuddin al-Hifni, and the renowned Maliki jurist and theologian Shaykh Ali al-Sa'idi, who we mentioned earlier. Al-Dardir would further extend his relationship to both Shaykh al-Hifni and Shaykh al-Sa'idi, who became his two principal teachers and who constituted his most formative training. Imam al-Dardir would eventually take Shaykh al-Hifni as his spiritual guide, by whom he was initiated into the Khalwati Tariqah. Oh man, now I have to make lots of comments. He likewise studied extensively with Shaykh Ali al-Sa'idi, who regarded Imam al-Dardir as his greatest pupil. Both scholars would eventually pass their respective rank onto Imam al-Dardir, making him Mufti of the Maliki school, rector of the residence hall college for the students from Upper Egypt, and one of Shaykh al-Hifni's most notable spiritual successors, Khulafa. Okay, there's a lot to unpack. So it says that he took Shaykh al-Hifni as his spiritual guide, by whom he was initiated into the Khalwati Tariqah. So first things first. So we talked in the beginning about sheikhs of ta'aleem and sheikhs of tarbiyah, sheikhs of education and sheikhs of, let's say, spiritual rectification. Okay. This idea as a concept was known from the very beginning of Islam, from the very, very beginning. But they say that this Sufism, tasawwuf in the beginning, was a reality without a name, and then it became a name without a reality. Okay? Focus on this expression, it's a very important expression. It was a reality without a name, and then it became a name without a reality. So what does it mean? What is the whole point of tasawwuf? You get like a million different definitions. One of my favorite definitions is as-sidqu ma'al haqq wa husnul khuluqi ma'al khalq. That it is to be honest and true with the true, with God, and to have good character with the people. It's a very simple definition, right? So what does it mean? It means that the person has gotten rid of as much of the bad stuff inside that they could get rid of. And they've put as much good stuff as they can so that they embody the teachings of the religion. There's people that teach the religion and there's people who embody the teachings of the religion. And they're known for like, this is their area of specialization. This was understood even in the time of the Imams. Like they say that the four Imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, so on, so they had sheikhs. They say that the Shaykh of Abu Hanifa was Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Allahu a'lam. But the point is that they had, even though they were like the highest level people in all of history, they deferred to other people when it came to their spiritual training. So this is the first point. And this period, first 500 years of Islam, there's no such thing as a tariqah, this word that was used here, tariqah, a Sufi order, or I guess that's the word that's usually used in like English translations and stuff. Sufi order. It's a funny word, but I guess it works. Tariqa literally means a path. Like it's the way that you take. So, but in the first 500 years, there's no concept like this. There's an understanding that there's people who you can take that from, and then there's people that you take other things from. Again, like there's people you learn theology from, there's people you learn fiqh from, there's people you learn tasawwuf from, there's people you learn hadith from, there's people you learn Quran from. Every field has its specialist, and you go to the specialist in that field, but there's no tariqah, like this formal kind of like, this is our path and it has these followers and so on and so forth. It's more like a student-teacher relationship. It becomes more formalized in the time of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani was a contemporary of Imam al-Ghazali. Actually, the year that Imam al-Ghazali left Baghdad and went on his like spiritual journey, you could say, is the year that Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani entered Baghdad. He's from Jilan, which is off which sea? I want to say the Caspian. And at 18, he went to Baghdad to study more. Like he was studying in his town. Generally, people do that. They study in their town, and eventually they go to the bigger city, they study more. So he left Jilan and he went to Baghdad. Long story short, the point is the idea of tariqas or Sufi orders or whatever begins roughly with him. There might be some debate about it, but roughly with his time, 500 after Hijrah. And then after that, you start to have like different teachers who have this like set of teachings that they emphasize in one's spiritual growth, and people follow them and they have a student-teacher relationship, whatever. They have the Qadiri Tariqa, which is named after Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. You have the Shadili Tariqa, which is named after Shaykh Ibn Hassan al-Shadili. You have the Naqshbandi Tariqa. You have the Chishti, you have the Rifa'i, you have any number of different paths. Some of them more true, some of them less true, some of them more true initially, some of them change over time. Like today, you probably have like, I don't know, thousands of Qadiri tariqas. This person's a Shaykh in the Qadiri tariqa. You can become their disciple. You become a Qadiri. He's supposed to help you get closer to Allah. She's supposed to help you get closer to Allah. There's probably like around the world, I don't know how many. Are all of them necessarily correct and true? Not necessarily. Do some of these groups do totally weirdo things? Yes, absolutely. Are some of these people actually like true and sincere? I believe so. So, we have to have some knowledge to be able to see like, okay, what is true from what is false? Like that's the whole point of this, okay? So when it says that he was initiated into the Khalwati Tariqa, that's one of them, Khalwatiyya. Khalwatiyya, actually, if I'm not mistaken, the founder of the Khalwatiyya is originally from Afghanistan. Allah help the people there. He likewise studied, I already said that. So he took on these positions. His career. Imam al-Dardir's formal career as Mufti and Rector began around the year 1189, 1775. After the passing of his master, Shaykh Ali al-Sa'idi, he taught the disciples of theology, jurisprudence, hadith, tafsir, and the Arabic disciplines in the Mosque of Al-Azhar. A close friend and student of Imam al-Dardir, the Indian polymath Murtada al-Zabidi, wrote a biographical entry for al-Dardir describing him, amongst other things, as unequaled in his time in the rational and transmitted disciplines. So there needs to be like a moment of pause on this just for a second. So that I've mentioned this before, but it's kind of hard to like this was a time when Al-Azhar was still strong. Okay, this is point number one. This was a time when Al-Azhar was still strong. Not necessarily saying that that's always the case today. Today, it's a mixed bag. There's people who are still very strong. There's people who are a complete joke. Okay, there's multiple things. But this was a time when it was still very strong. And it's being written about him. Murtada Zabidi, by the way, just to give you an idea of who's like writing this. He did a commentary on Ihya Ulumuddin of Imam al-Ghazali. It's like a massive, gigantic work. Like he himself was a scholar of very high level. And he's saying about al-Dardir that he was unequaled in his time in the rational and transmitted disciplines, meaning like the logic, philosophy, so on and so forth, as well as like Quran, Sunnah, so on. I'm going to say it again. If you have questions, you can ask questions. It's okay. There's a lot here. There's a lot here. If you want to save it for after the live stream stuff, we can do that too. There's no problem. As always, when we teach, my point in teaching is not to force anything upon you. The point in teaching is to say, like, these are the things that I've come to. These are the things that I understand based on things that I've read and things that I've heard and people that I've sat with and so on and so forth. And like, it's a free country. Like, it really is a free country. Like, alhamdulillah, you can agree, you can disagree, you can want to do it, you cannot do it. Like, it's like, you know, like everyone has their own, every person has to make that choice for themselves, right? Like, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. No one's going to carry someone else's burden in the day of judgment in front of Allah. No one's going to carry your burden for you. No one's going to carry my burden for me. If I didn't believe that these things were true at some level, I wouldn't teach them. And I definitely wouldn't live stream them and risk my reputation and being blacklisted in the community for teaching this. I hope you guys understand that. This is very dangerous, actually. What I'm doing right now is very likely to lead to some level of backlash, whether or not it gets to me in the end. At some point, you're like, this is our tradition. Shidda wa bait. Like, you can disagree, but you can't negate its existence. In addition to his scholarly role, al-Dardir was also taken by many as a spiritual guide and is regarded as a reviver of the Khalwati order by some. Imam al-Dardir eventually would go on to establish a sub-order within the Tariqah and his own Zawiyah, funded by the Sultan of Morocco, Muhammad III, after being astonished at the astute character and generosity of al-Dardir with the Sultan's son. So what happened with this, the story's not here. What happened with this is that there was a Sultan of Morocco. He used to, this in itself is actually a really interesting point. Think about this. The Sultan of Morocco every year would send chunks of money to Cairo to support Al-Azhar and the institutions around Al-Azhar and the scholars of Al-Azhar. He's the Sultan of Morocco. You know, like, why would he do that? He would do it for the same reason that some random person in Southern California who's a multimillionaire would send $1 million as a gift to Harvard. Because it's Harvard, we have to support Harvard. Like, this is our bastion of learning, right? So he's the Sultan of Morocco. He sent money every year to the people in Cairo. And so what happened was his son went for Hajj. The Sultan's son went for Hajj. He passes through Egypt. He goes to Arabia. He makes his Hajj. He comes back to Cairo. Everyone would stop on Cairo on their trip if they're passed that way. So he would stop. He stopped in Cairo. Afterwards, he ran out of money. Okay. So now you have the son of the Sultan who's in Cairo and ran out of money. And this became like, it came to Imam al-Dardir. And Imam al-Dardir was like, this is crazy. His father sends us money every single year for us to, like, this child, the kid, not the kid, but this young man has more right to the money than I do. So he took the money that the Sultan would give him and he gave it to the son. And the son was fine and he went back to Morocco. Like, you know, alhamdulillah. When the Sultan heard about it, he was like, wow. And he sent the next year 10 times the amount that he would normally send to people like Imam al-Dardir. He sent to Imam al-Dardir 10 times the amount. So he got the money and he was like, alhamdulillah. He went and he made Hajj. And then when he came back, he started this, he made his Zawiyah, his little like space. Yeah.
What year was that?
This is, this Sultan of Morocco died in 1790. So, Allahu Alam, sometime between, he became the rector of the college in 1775. So probably somewhere in that period. But that's the story they say behind it. A notable aspect to al-Dardir's spiritual path and revival was that it brought together both scholars and students of sacred knowledge and the laity. His concern for the common man in his society was evident in his writings, which were always tiered to include material that could be easily read and understood by all the Muslims in his society. So like I said, if you take the original text of the Kharida, you can understand it with like a little bit of help. You know? And if you take his commentary on it, now you have to like actually be a student of knowledge. But a regular person could understand the first level of it. So he would tier things like this. And also he has the other one that Ustad Fuad taught. What is it? The Creed of Oneness, Al-Aqidah Tawheediyah. The Creed of Oneness. He taught it. It's in the Majlis YouTube thing. evident in his writings. Imam al-Dardir also followed in the footsteps of his predecessors, Shaykh al-Sa'idi and Shaykh al-Hifni, who commanded the respect and admiration of the ruling class and were not shy in publicly rebuking their injustices and unethical behavior. Imam al-Dardir was particularly admired for interceding on behalf of oppressed commoners who sought his aid against the ruling class. In fact, there are numerous accounts in al-Dardir's own works that offer social and political commentary aimed to push back on the injustices of the ruling class. This can also be seen in the famous historical chronicles of Abdurrahman al-Jabarti. Though he was not appointed the position of Shaykh al-Azhar, al-Jabarti famously notes that al-Dardir was seen as the Shaykh of all of Egypt. Al-Jabarti substantiates this position by noting that Imam al-Dardir, quote, would command to the good and forbid the evil, repelled what was vile, and strove to implement the truth for the sake of God. He did not fear blame or criticism, and he valiantly strove in his pursuit of good. This general disposition regarding al-Dardir is further supported by al-Jabarti in several accounts where he cites miraculous incidents seen at the hands of al-Dardir in confronting the injustices of the ruling class. Many of these incidents were witnessed publicly and became widespread in the community, affirming the high rank of the Imam. Okay, I don't think it's mentioned here, so I'm just going to tell you one of these stories. Keep in mind that this is relatively recent, right? Like Imam al-Dardir is not that long ago. Trying to think of so al-Bajuri, he knew Imam, he was a contemporary of al-Dardir. And between me and Imam al-Bajuri, there's probably, I think 3 people. I might be mistaken. But just to give you there's not that many people between us and him. So when you say there were miracles that were seen by masses of people, these are miracles that were seen by masses of people and told to masses of people, and it's only 4 or 5 generations, and you'll get there. 6 generations maybe. Some of these people that are between us and him were very old, So one of the stories is that when there was a new ruler, I forget which one it was, and this ruler, so Imam al-Dardir, he was very famous that he wouldn't eat from anything that was doubtful. So if you had any reason to believe that the food that he was going to eat had any possibility of not being halal, for any reason, he wouldn't touch it. And he was known for this. And basically the ruler found out that Imam al-Dardir didn't want to eat his food because he believed that this ruler had basically stolen land and properties and stuff like that. So anything that he serves to people has some amount of impropriety in it, because he's stolen a lot of money from people, okay? So what does he do? What does this ruler do? These people are corrupt. The ruler, he calls this big gathering and he invites Imam al-Dardir. Says, you have to come have this meal with me, with all of my people and the ruling class, basically. And he's basically no, I'm not going to do it. So then what he does is he calls an invitation. I'm paraphrasing the story, bear with me if there's 1 or 2 pieces that are not exact. I might, but you'll get the idea. He calls a bigger group of people and he invites all of this, not as senior scholars, students of knowledge, not as senior people, so on. Because for them, if they don't answer the invitation, he'll actually kill them or torture them or prison them or do something else, right? He can't do it to Imam al-Dardir because he's too big. But these other people, he can do it. He can do it to them. So at first he's and he invites him as well. He's now what are you going to do, And so the Shaykh now has to accept the invitation because he doesn't want all the students to get harmed, right? So now he comes to the invitation and the ruler's okay, you sit next to me, and he puts the food out and the food comes out and everyone starts eating and stuff and he doesn't eat. So he just sits there. And then the ruler's aren't you going to eat the food? And he's I don't need I can't eat something that has some sort of doubt about it. He's are you saying that there's something wrong with my food and there's a doubt about it? If you're going to make this claim, then you have to have something that backs up your claim. Where's your evidence to this? How can you just say that about me? You don't have any evidence for it. Aren't you a righteous person? And aren't you this and this? And this kind of stuff. Spiritual abuse. The other side of spiritual abuse. And he says, okay. And so and this was witnessed by masses of people. He takes a handful of rice, and he picks up the rice in his hand, and he basically makes dua that, oh Allah, if there's something that's not okay with this food, then give us a sign for that. and he holds the rice in his hand, and as he's holding the rice in his hand and he's kind of like holding it, blood starts to drip from it. Blood drips from the rice. Say like there's people's blood that was spilled by the oppression of this man for him to serve this rice right now. So the blood drips, and then it's like, okay, this is, what can you say to that, right? All these people witnessed it now, so on and so forth. So this is one of the miracles about Imam Abu. There's many of them that are narrated. Allahu alam. You don't have to. It's a very important subtlety. You don't have to believe in every miracle that is narrated. You do kind of just have to believe in the concept. You can believe in the concept of like, okay, some people have miracles. That's fine. You could be like, I don't know this story. I'm not, whatever. I don't know how I feel about it. It's fine. But the concept, we have to believe in the concept in general. Anyways, there's many stories like this. Many of these incidents were witnessed publicly and became widespread in the community, affirming the high rank of the Imam. Shaykh Abdul Halim Mahmoud, who was the former Shaykh al-Azhar in the 70s, he came here to Islamic Center of Southern California with Shaykh al-Husri. There's pictures of it and stuff. It's pretty cool. In his biography, Imam al-Dardir mentions that you'll find no scholar of al-Azhar in disagreement about the saintly miracles, the karamat of al-Barakat al-Dardir, by which God would open the closed doors of the oppressed of Egypt through the supplication of the Shaykh. Moreover, corroborating accounts related by Jabarti, al-Zabidi, Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabahani, and others provide further evidence that many of these miraculous incidents were testified to by hundreds of people. Shaykh al-Nabahani highlights this point in a section of his compendium on saintly miracles, Jami' Karamat al-Awliya, describing al-Dardir as the son of experiential knowledge, the Gnostic of his era, and the object of consensus for all Muslims from all the different schools of thought as to his high rank, sainthood, wilayah, spiritual guidance, and overall benefit in every Muslim life. It's high praise. Okay. Nabahani, Ahl Beirut. You guys know Nabahani? Nabahani is buried in Beirut. Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabahani. When I went to Beirut, we on the way to the airport, we visited him. I have no idea where it is. Somehow someone knew, and the taxi driver stumbled us there, and alhamdulillah, we found it. His written works. Imam al-Dardir wrote on a number of different religious disciplines, including Quranic exegesis, dialecticology, jurisprudence, tasawwuf, prophetic biography, rhetoric, and a beautiful array of poems. The bulk of the work that he is most well known for, and to which the foundation of traditional Islamic studies in the contemporary period still relies heavily on, are within the three core disciplines of jurisprudence, theology, and tasawwuf. Among his major works are the following. When it's published, you can read that. And we're in the end of the biography now. His death and legacy. Although Imam al-Dardir was engaged in many of the intellectual pursuits of his time and advanced to the highest levels of erudition, his main focus was always fundamentally a spiritual pursuit, as he so eloquently recalls of his own spiritual teacher, Shaykh al-Hifni. So this is interesting. And there's a typo here. I have to fix that. The magnificent Imam. So now Shaykh al-Dardir is talking about his Shaykh. And this in and of itself is extremely important. The teachers take from teachers. People don't, there's an independence that is gained over time, but one will always have people who are more senior to them. If you find imams and sheikhs and stuff who don't defer to anyone other than themselves, even, and I'm not talking about dead people, okay? They'll refer to people other than themselves who have passed away. But I'm saying they don't refer to anyone other than themselves who's alive. Who's alive? This is not a good sign. Okay. And this was actually one of the major realizations that I had on a personal level when I left ICOI. Right? Was that I had really good peers, and they were all peers. And I didn't have people who were more senior than me that I could really look up to and get mentorship from, and so on and so forth. Of course, there's Dr. Muzammil, there's other people around, but I wasn't really close to them. And so that was an issue. I'll say that about myself. That was an issue about myself and the way that I was doing things and the way that I was making decisions and so on and so forth. So now al-Dardir is talking about his Shaykh, Hifni. The magnificent Imam whom kings were in awe over was a magnanimous character whose enemies testified to his dignified demeanor and generosity. This quality was to the degree that everyone recognized that kings were unable to tend to their own affairs as much as he was able to. Those who sat with him always longed for more of his beautiful character and love, even to those who were invidious. I don't even know what that word means. Anyone know what that word means? Invidious? Yes. You can ask Siri. Yes. Siri, what does invidious mean? Invidious. Siri's like, that's not a word. Wow, it is a word. Okay. The comparison or distinction unfairly. Oh, Uncle Charlie chimed in too. Our resident literature expert. Is envious. Okay. Jealousy. Cesar also language expert. MashaAllah, we have amazing people in this community. Where was I? Invidious. Where is invidious? He was beauty, his face like the sun during the peak of the day, to the point that all who laid eyes on him were reminded of God, the Almighty, ever forgiving. The common people and the elite were blessed simply by gazing upon him, and they would flock to him yearning for relief. He was the one who brought together the reality of the external sciences and the secrets of the divine, the interpreter of thoughts, as was seen by those who had traversed the spiritual path with him. He would cultivate his companions by gazing at them and serving them as a guide. This is interesting. Okay, I want you to think about that statement. This was a great scholar and spiritual master. So how did he teach his students? By looking at them and serving them as a guide. Not like, how do I say it? Like not by sitting there and lecturing them all the time and speaking to them and admonishing them and saying, why did you do this? You do this, and shaming them and blaming them and all this kind of stuff. You would just be with them and serve them and look at them and pray for them. And this was how he gave them spiritual training. Spiritual training is not the same as like intellectual training. It's different. It happens differently. I'll make a comment on this to probably my regret after the live stream ends, inshallah, if you remind me. They revered him in a way that you would not find amongst even heroic figures. In relation to this quotation, the former Grand Imam of al-Azhar, Shaykh Abdul Halim Mahmud, said about al-Dardir, if we recounted all of these qualities that were spoken of in relation to him, we would see that he too achieved these noble qualities that are so loved by God and his messenger. It is altogether fitting that al-Dardir saw such remarkable qualities in his teachers whom he loved so, and sought to emulate seeking the prophetic way, who would likewise be sought after by so many for these same qualities. Al-Dardir died in 1204 after Hijrah 1786, and his funeral prayer was held at al-Azhar Masjid, garnering a large crowd of people from all walks of life. His body was then buried nearby, and his Zawiyah, it's like right behind Azhar, in the street right behind Azhar, where he remains until the current day. His works remain a beacon of light for our time as we strive to gain an understanding and manifestation that binds us to our holistic tradition. We pray his legacy of scholarship and service to the people live on in all those who inherit from the Imam their connections to the beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Ameen. This is the end of the biography by Ustad Fuad. There was something I was going to say about this. I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, so we'll, not next Sunday, the Sunday after, we'll begin the translation. Next Sunday, there is no Sunday class. It is moved to Saturday. 5:30 doors open, 6 o'clock session starts, and Imam Zaid Shakir will be joining us next Saturday. Here, same place. And then the following Sunday, we'll resume, inshallah. This idea of like du'as being answered and so on and so forth. Some of you may have seen the post that I posted on Facebook. I don't know when it was. What day is today? Sunday. So it was last night about Shaykh Ali Saleh, Hafidhullah. There's a part that I didn't post yet about his wife, who he would call a Shaykha. He would call her a Shaykha. And Shaykh Ali, we'll just keep it here. Okay. Shaykh Ali, alhamdulillah, I didn't study with him a whole lot, but I did study with him. And he used to welcome us in his home, which is in the area of Bab Zuwaydah, behind, in the area of Al-Azhar. And his home was like very, very small, very humble. And, someone entirely dedicated to learning and knowledge and worship and so on and so forth. And he himself was largely blind, And his first wife had passed away. And when he got remarried, he married this woman who we call Shaykha. I think her name was Aisha. Shaykha Aisha. And she was fully blind. Rahimahullah. She's passed away now. And one of the students, he asked Shaykh Ali, he said, why did you have special needs? When you chose to get married, why did you also marry someone who has special needs? Like how are you guys going to take care of yourselves, basically, you know? And he said, I married her because I wanted to marry someone who would help me in coming closer to Allah and doing acts of obedience to Allah. And so I married the Shaykha. And the Shaykha had memorized the whole Quran. Like one time when we were sitting in his home, the living room was like maybe the size of one of these rugs. No, I don't think so. Maybe like, trying to think, like, okay, so we're on one couch and the table comes like just far enough for you to sit, right? And then there's another chair and there's the wall. So that's the size of the room, both ways. Just enough so like one person can sit in the table and one people. We're sitting in the room one time and we're reading with him and his wife came home. And she knocks on the door and like just for her to get in from the door to her room, which is like right there, is difficult with people because it's so small and like there's 4 people in the house. It's really crowded, you know, subhanAllah. But she comes to the door and he's like some of these people who are friends of Allah, all you hear from them is happiness. It's amazing. Like the guy has nothing. There's nothing in his home. He's mostly blind. He's largely disheveled because he's mostly blind. Like his home, the stove is in the hallway. There's no kitchen. Like there's a hallway to the bathroom and there's a stove in the hallway. That's his kitchen, right? And it's all joy, right? And she opens the door and she comes in and he's like, Ahlan, ahlan, ahlan bi-shaykha, ahlan bi-shaykha. You know, he's like so happy she came home, you know? And he's like, Ya shaykha, ya shaykha. الناس دوت من أمريكا. He's like, Shaykha, these students, they're from America. They're from America. ادعي لهم شيخة, ادعي لهم. Like make dua for them, and they'll go back to their country and they'll teach people and so on and so forth. And then she's like making dua and she's trying to get to the room. And he's like, يفتخر بها. So beautiful. Like he's like honored by her, you know? So he's like, he tells us, الشيخة تحفظ القرآن على ظهر القلب. الشيخة تحفظ القرآن على ظهر القلب. It's like the Shaykha, she's memorized the whole Quran. She memorized the whole Quran. She's fully blind. And like the room is so close that she goes in her room and she's sitting there and we're reading tafsir Jalalain for IOK students. We're reading tafsir Jalalain. And while we're reading tafsir Jalalain, if there's like a mistake in the ayah or something, she corrected from her room. She could hear it. She's like right there, you know. She passed away, Allah yarhamha. The point is, this is someone who, like I saw with my own eyes. One of the stories about her is that she also was mustajab ad-da'wah. When she would make dua, her dua would be answered. And that one time, one of her neighbors, their son went missing. After they're panicking and they're trying to figure out what to do and whatever, and then they're like, you know, we're gonna go see the Shaykha. So they go to the Shaykha and they're like, our son is missing. Can you please make dua that he comes home and he's safe and so on and so forth. So she makes dua and she's like, don't worry, your son is coming home today. And by the end of the day, his son had come home. And subhanAllah, there's people like this. The problem is we've seen so many people who pretend like they're like that we stop believing that people like that actually exist. And the people who are actually like that, they're never going to pretend that they're like that. They're never going to make any claim. They're never going to, like, there's no way that when they came to her, she was like, oh, it's a good thing you came to me because mashallah, my dua is answered. And now I'm going to make dua and your son is going to return. Never, right? It's never going to be that way. Another story they said about her was that she, although like I mentioned, they were extremely poor themselves, right? And the Shaykh was so generous. He would like invite us, charge us some outrageously cheap amount of money for like a 2-hour class. And then he gets so excited, he teaches for like 4 hours. Like in the middle of the night, he's just going, like he's super excited. So she would give charity to these people that she knew that were in need, give them food and stuff like that. So one time she gave the food to someone and told them to give it to the people who need it. And the person came back and she said, did you give it to them? And they said, yes. And she said, did they eat it? And they said, yes. And she said, yeah, I know. And she said, okay, because I can taste it in my own mouth. Like she gave it to the poor and she said, I could taste it in my own mouth that they ate it. And subhanAllah. Radiallahu anhu. So this was all to say that some of these stories about Imam al-Dardir, you know, they're there. And may Allah be pleased with him. And, inshallah, Ustad Fuad and Shireen are going to Egypt in a couple of days, and they're going to convey the salam of the whole majlis to Imam al-Dardir, inshallah, amongst their first things that they do, inshallah, once they get there. And I don't know if Sayyid is still there. Maybe he could do it now. He might be able to go pray Fajr there and give our salam if he's still in Hussein. So, رضي الله عنهم صلى الله عليه وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.